Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. I've been running for a few years now and have the privilege of meeting many incredible runners on my travels all across the country. This podcast is intended to share those amazing conversations. This week's podcast is with Mario Fraioli. Mario is a coach and very solid runner himself, living in Northern California. In this episode, we talked about the state of affairs in running and how Mario thinks we can all help turn the tide for the better. We talked a bit about mental health and Mario's experience with an eating disorder as a younger runner and the guidance he has for other coaches and athletes. We covered some of the ways that Mario has seen the running industry change over the years, and we also talked about coaching an athlete through different parts of their journey, including through injuries and the offseason. Given that we recorded the day before North Face 50, I got Mario's predictions on the race, and he was pretty spot on. I hope you enjoy. And welcome back. I am here in the fringes of Marin with Mario Fraioli. Mario, thanks for having me today.
Thanks for coming up to cow country.
Of course. We were joking that it took twice as long to get here because people in California can't drive in the rain.
Well, we've got some precipitation, which we badly need for the first time in a while. I don't know that this is enough to really do much, but hopefully this is like a little teaser for the rainy season that is impending.
Got it. Well, for traffic's sake, it made things interesting today, but hopefully it settles the dust on the trails and gives some necessary water here.
Yeah, hopefully I'll get you out of here before the commute starts so that you're not dealing with the worst of it.
Lovely. Well, anyways, thanks for taking the time to chat today. I'm excited to get into it here with you. So first question, let's go with a hard one. Who is Mario?
I'll steal the line from Red Hot Chili Peppers. I'm a runner, rebel, and a stunner. No, really.
That's the best answer I've heard yet.
I'm Mario Fraioli. I am a lot of things. I'm a husband to my wife, Christine. Got brothers. I'm a brother to my siblings. You know, I'm a son. I'm a runner. I coach. I host the Morning Shakeout podcast. I write a newsletter of the same name. I could go on and on and on, but I think those are the high points.
So you're a man that wears many hats, is what you're saying, and
yes,
and a lot of those hats fall in the running arena, and many of them outside of the running arena. So how did you get into? Maybe give a little background on yourself. How did you get into? Let's first start with running. How'd you get into running?
Yeah, so I've been running and involved with the sport on various levels since 1997 or so, 96, 97. Yeah, it was after the 96 Olympics. High school is when I got started, and I started running cross country to keep in shape for basketball. And I've told this story many a time, and it's just continued to snowball from there. And here we are 22 years later, and the ball is still rolling. So I started as an athlete. I've been involved with the competitive side of the sport since day one. Ran collegiately at Stonehill College in Massachusetts. Continued to compete after graduation, still compete today, many years later. Started working a couple years after school at a specialty running shop. I was freelancing prior to that for some different outlets. I worked for a newspaper as a copy editor. I've done a lot of different things. Eventually ended up at competitormagazine.com, where I was for 6 years as a senior editor in charge of most of the training content and event coverage. I've been coaching since I got out of college, really, 2004. Started just helping out some of my former teammates, getting ready for races after we had all graduated from school. And, you know, that has picked up steam to the point where it's how I spend most of my working time now. So yeah, I've been involved. I've been involved on a number of different levels, and for a long time.
Was that a progression that you were expecting, anticipating, planning, or has it really just evolved over time?
No, I don't really plan for much, to be honest. I knew generally that I wanted to work in running. I had aspirations of becoming a professional runner, whatever that meant, out of college, and that quickly fizzled out. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life other than I knew running would be a big part of it. And still now at 37 years old, that I know that much. I know that running is what I want to be involved with and how I want to spend most of my time. But where I've been involved, how I've been involved, the levels I've been involved at, have evolved to this point and will continue to evolve for the foreseeable future.
Cool. What is it about running that you love so much?
It's the glue that connects most of the pieces of my life together. Most of my closest friends, deepest relationships are through running. I met my wife through running. I make my living, through running. I've learned a lot about myself over the years through running. So, it's at this point, it's hard to imagine my life without it. So, I think those are the high points.
Cool. How has the industry changed over the last 15 to 20 years? And the second part of this loaded question is what's next?
Well,
or what do you think is next?
I mean, the industry itself has changed in a number of ways. So when we're talking about the industry, are we talking about the commercial side of it, like footwear, apparel industries, racing, events? What are we lumping under?
Yeah,
the industry?
I think so. This was a listener submitted question,
okay.
And I think it was about the interest was the human side of it. So how has the coaching, how has the training, how has the recovery? What's been your visibility into how that's shifted over time?
Well, so let's just go down the coaching route. It's easier today than it's ever been to call yourself a coach, right, or to become a coach. And a lot of that is due to technology. Some of that is due to social media. Part of that is due to people wanting to do something that they enjoy doing as a way to make a living. And a lot of coaching today, a lot of what I do with my own coaching is remote based. And I've been doing that, for the last, 15 years or so. But how I communicate with my athletes, how I plan training, how I run that side of my professional life has definitely changed a lot. And, 10, 15 years ago, you didn't have as many coaches. It wasn't a very straightforward path into doing it. I mean, there's certainly people who were doing it remotely and continue to be, but it's become a lot easier to do that. But the other side of that is people, runners, and I think this extends outside of running too, are recognizing the value and importance of coaching and seeking it out. I mean, many years ago, and to some degree today, I would meet a lot of runners who don't feel worthy of a coach. Yeah. I think only serious runners or elite runners should have a coach. And more runners are realizing that regardless of what level you're at, coaching can be really helpful in helping you along your path, whatever that means.
And even more so if you aren't an elite and you don't know what to do.
Yeah, that's the argument I make. And I think the newer folks in sport who either didn't have good coaching when they ran in high school or college, or didn't run in high school or college, so they've never had that type of coaching. It's invaluable to have someone who has experience and has knowledge and can help lead you along whatever path it is that you want to follow.
So how do you match up with an athlete, or how do you know if it's going to be a good relationship versus, maybe your style isn't what they need, or maybe that they're not going to work well with you. How do you rectify that? How do you seek out these relationships that are going to work?
I've actually never sought out an athlete in my entire coaching career. I've always been approached by the athlete who is interested in working with me. And with all of them, it starts with a conversation, just getting to know one another better if I don't know them well enough already, and understanding who they are, their background, what it is they want to do, and me just being honest with them as to whether or not I think I'll be a good fit. Mm-hmm. Because whether it's me or some other coach, like there is not one coach for every athlete. Yeah. And I know for me, because I've been doing this long enough and have worked with probably at this point hundreds of athletes. I don't even know if it's hundreds of athletes, honestly. But a lot of athletes who I'm a good fit for and who I'm not, and the type of athlete that I am best suited to. So it starts with a conversation, and it's honesty from both sides, like the athlete being honest with me about who they are, what they want to do, and me being honest with them as to whether or not I think I can help them, because usually that's my first question to any prospective athlete is, how can I help you? Mm-hmm. And it just evolves from there.
And And what have you learned about the online coaching versus in-person coaching?
You almost have to over communicate.
Yeah.
I think communication is the key to any successful relationship, not just coach athlete.
Right.
When you are not seeing your athletes on a weekly or regular basis, you've got to stay in close touch with them if you want to do your job well.
Right.
And for me, I mean, I've always kind of tended to over communicate, and I'm just always asking questions, checking in, seeing how they're doing. And without that, I just don't know how a successful remote coach-athlete relationship can work.
Definitely. So switching gears a little bit, let's talk about Morning Shakeout. How did that evolve? How did you get into doing that? And where do you want to see the newsletter go? Where do you want to see the podcast go?
So the Morning Shakeout started as a newsletter only in 2015 while I was still at Competitor Magazine. I think actually right about now. So we're having this conversation mid-November-ish, like almost late November, is about when I launched the first one 5 years ago. So I guess happy birthday, Morning Shakeout. I know for a fact it was 208 weeks ago because I just put out the 208th issue and I haven't missed a week since I started it. But I was at Competitor Magazine working as a senior editor, and I'd sat on the idea of what is now the Morning Shakeout for quite a while. I had the domain for probably at least a year prior to that, and I knew that I wanted to create something that was on the side. I had no business ambitions behind it all. It's just a creative pursuit, just an itch that I wanted to scratch, just a place where I could write. And I was thinking about it as mostly a written thing where I could write about whatever I wanted to write about. I could get opinionated on things that were happening in the sport. I could link off to things that I've read or listened to. Actually, I wasn't listening to much at the time because podcasts weren't quite as big as they are now 5 years ago.
Everyone's got a podcast these days.
Yeah, they weren't for me. I know. Here we are. Funny enough, having this conversation. But I just wanted a place that was mine. I had full ownership over it. I could do whatever I want. I didn't have anyone telling me that the content wasn't a good fit. But it was just for me. It was just sort of a creative outlet for whatever I wanted to write about, link off to. Almost use as a journal of sorts. And that was sort of the idea behind it. And finally, at one point, I remember I sent out a tweet and said, I'm sending this thing out next Tuesday.
Sign up.
If you want to sign up, here's where you can do that. I don't know what it's going to be or how long it's going to last, but let's just give it a shot. And here we are, 4 years later, not 5 years, 4 years later. And it's still a thing and it's still going strong. And it is now something that is my job, or a big part of my job, and how I make a chunk of my living. And the podcast spawned off of that 2 years ago now in 2017. I think I just sent off episode 87 yesterday for editing. And now that's a weekly thing. And it was really a natural evolution of the newsletter. I was doing these interviews with athletes prior to the podcast. I called it Going Long, and I would have a conversation with them over Skype. I would record it, I'd get it transcribed, then I'd get photos and I'd kind of lay it out. And I still like that format and I'd like to get back to that. But the podcast was a natural evolution off of that. And I had started about 2-3 years ago. I really started getting into podcasts as a consumer, and I love the medium itself. And I was looking for running podcasts because that's what I am. I'm a running nerd at heart, and there are some good ones out there, but I couldn't find the one that I really wanted to listen to. So I decided to create it myself. And I knew, because of my experience in the running media and the connections that I had made over the years at Competitor Magazine and the experience that I had interviewing people, that I could do it well. And I think I've done a good job with it. I enjoy doing it. They're conversations that I want to have with people that I'm genuinely interested in, and seems to have been a pretty good response from listeners. So yeah, both of those things are going strong here.
Cool. And how do you choose your guests?
They're just people who I want to learn more about. Some of them are folks that I've interviewed many times in the past, and with my podcast, I go longer and deeper than I did when I would interview them at Competitor. Usually when I interview an athlete at Competitor, it would be, a 10 to 20 minute conversation. It was very topical. It was about the race.
Something they've done.
Yeah, it was about the race they just ran, or if I'm writing a training article, it was, specific training type of questions. And, with the podcast, I go much beyond that and try to get, much like you do with your show, it's like try to get, as deep as I can with them, trying to understand, who they are, how they got into the sport or whatever it is that they're doing within the sport. And yeah, I mean, just asking curious questions. So, I mean, that's sort of my, I choose all of my guests. I don't ask, like, I don't know if people would agree with this or not, but like, I don't ask for guest suggestions because if I'm not interested in talking to the person, then, I mean, it's not going to be a good conversation. So, I mean, that's what I use sort of as my, kind of my standard as far as like who I want to sit down with.
Cool. And you're doing most of them online? Do you do some in person as well?
I've done more and more of them in person over the last year. That's my preference. They're just better conversations. When you can sit down across from someone like we're doing now, it's going to be a much richer conversation than if you're doing it over Skype. And that's not to knock Skype at all. Great that we have that tool and that option. And the first, 25 or so episodes were all done over Skype. And, there's benefits to both. With Skype, we don't need to be in the same place. There's more opportunity to actually have the conversation. Whereas obviously when you're sitting down with someone in person, you've got to be in the same place. You got to make your schedules align. But I'm trying to do more and more of them in person just because I think the quality of the conversation is higher. It's also a lot easier to control audio than it is.
You don't have things beeping in the background.
Yeah, like we're not online, and as long as I've got batteries in the recorder and I can see that it's picking up sound from both sides, I know that it's recording. Whereas when you're doing it over Skype, I mean, I've had internet drop on my end. I've had internet drop on the other end of it, and it just kind of creates a little bit more of a hassle and a headache. So I'm trying to do as many of them as I can in person, but I will definitely do them over Skype still if that's the only or best option.
For sure. So personally, I try and do much of the same thing that you mentioned. Go deep with people and not just talk about their accomplishments and things like that. And Eric Schranz from Ultra Runner Podcast said when I was starting mine, he was like, please don't just be another running podcast that goes and talks to elite athletes and talks about their major accomplishments. And there's plenty of that out there. I don't think either of us do that at all. And it's cool that you can have these conversations with the same person and get totally different content out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have plenty of conversations with elite athletes. I have those relationships, and I know they have good stories. And I think, you can get a good story from an elite athlete, but you can also get a great story from someone that nobody knows. And that's the fun of having it be my thing. Is I can have on
whoever you want.
Yeah, I can have on whoever I want, and we can have the conversation that we want to have. So, and I try to really do that. I try to have a mix of guests from elite athletes to not so well known runners who I think have an interesting story and I'm interested to learn more about. For me, people in the industry who are sort of behind the scenes that you're probably familiar with things that they've done. Brand, I just had Jesse Williams on my show. He was the sports marketing director at Brooks. He was kind of behind Hanson's Brooks project and bringing on a lot of athletes in the Brooks PR Invitational. Not many people outside of the industry know who he is, but he's done some things that you are certainly aware of. So having those types of conversations as well is interesting to me. Coaches, I mean, I'm a coach myself, and I look at a lot of those conversations as continuing education for me because I can learn from these people. I'm like, if I learn from these people, they're going to help make me a better coach, and then the people who are listening are going to take some stuff away from it as well, and everybody benefits. So yeah, I've tried to diversify my guest list as best that I can.
Cool. Shifting gears again, speaking of topical conversations, I'd be remiss to mention or remiss if I didn't bring up, what Mary Cain has started, or
floodgates are open,
or what she's continued to push forward. And I think we're finally seeing, the potential for change. So I'd love to hear your take on, the state of affairs.
Well, I mean, there's two sides of it, or at least I'm looking at two different sides of it. So there's Mary's case specifically, and she's calling out her former coach, Alberto Salazar, who, I mean, amongst other things, he's not had a good month, really, in terms of the news. So it's like in Mary's case, it's like, he was, telling her she needed to get thinner and thinner and thinner, and that's what she needed to do to improve her performance. And now it turns out it wasn't just Mary. This was how he was acting toward a lot of his athletes, and it's systemic. And before that, you've got Oregon Project in the headlines and Alberto Salazar, and he's got a 4-year ban for breaking anti-doping rules. So it's like, things aren't looking good from that, from that side of things. And obviously there are a lot of problems with him and that program that are now coming to light. And people had suspected things were happening over the years, and we're just learning now the extent of it. And I still don't even think we're done. But the other side of it is it's systemic in the way that it's like this is not just an Alberto Salazar problem. This is not just an Oregon Project problem. This is a sport-wide problem, certainly in running at all levels, professional, collegiate, high school, unfortunately, but also in other sports. And I think, and this is starting to happen now, and I mean, this is still fresh. I mean, we're like a week removed from, I think exactly a week removed. I think it was last Thursday that the story dropped. So it's like we're a week removed from this dropping, but now all of a sudden we're having conversations about, programs at all levels of sport, and prioritizing health over performance, and looking at athletes as whole people, and not just like a revolving door to help.
Door of stable of horses.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think that's important, because I mean, I've certainly observed it throughout my experience as an athlete and someone, in running. And it's not just the weight thing. I mean, that's certainly a big part of it, but it's like, just health of the athletes, sort of, in general. So I think it's, kudos to Mary Cain, because it takes a lot of bravery and honesty for her to come out and tell her story. But also, whether she knew this or not, it's starting a much bigger conversation that honestly is overdue.
Yeah. Yeah. I talked with Mary last week, and she was excited about creating structural change and really moving the ball forward on, like you said, systemic change. One of your athletes, Eo Wang, yesterday was talking about on our panel, what is health? She was answering the question, what is good health? And her answer was, when I'm sleeping well, when I'm eating well, when I'm feeling well, and most importantly, when I wake up and feel good, that's good health. And I think that's I call it the Stoke meter. Mm-hmm. and I think that that is important. And I think that's like one of the most important lessons and one of the most important subjective measures of health. It's not the times you're running, it's not your weight, it's not your, whatever, but are you enjoying it? And I can't remember if it was her or somebody else on the panel that made the comment, but they said, you don't have to do this. Like, this is a choice. You're choosing to run. And I think that a lot of people, amateurs definitely included, miss that. And they're like, I have to run New York, or I have to do this long run, or it's like, no, you don't. And I think that the mental health, the physical health, it all plays a part in, the state of affairs.
Yeah, well, it's a holistic look at health. I mean, when I talk to a lot of my athletes, and I coach professionals and elites, but I coach a lot of age groupers as well. And one thing that I'm trying to look out for with all of them, because I can control their training.
Right.
That's about the only lever that I'm going to pull for one of my athletes. But in my conversations with them, understanding who they are as a person, what they have going on in their life, what gets them excited, what have they struggled with. So when I'm writing their training, I want to make sure that the running piece of it occupies a healthy place in their life. On the flip side, it helps understand the other stuff, because you want to make sure that, not that I can control these things, but that the other things that they're involved with in their life are also supporting their running, and that there's that's what I call like a healthy balance between those two sides of it. And it's much more than two sides of it. But to me, that's health, is when things are in relative harmony. Mm-hmm. I mean, and you're going to have periods of time when you are training for a marathon and you're a little more in on that, then you might be at other times of the year. But at the same time, to your point, make sure that you're doing that because it's something that you want to do.
Right.
It's what gets you out of bed in the morning. It's an exciting pursuit because if you feel like you're obligated to do it for X, Y, or Z reasons, I mean, that is not health. I mean, to your point and to Eo's point, that is not health.
Right.
And,
even if you're supremely fit in that moment.
Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, whether it's running or something else, like, yes, there are obligations that we all need to fulfill, in our lives. And that's part of it and understanding that. But in terms of pursuits like running or things that are, even, I mean, if it's how you make your job, I think or if that is your job and how you make your living, your perspective is going to be a little bit different. But for 99% of us, this is a hobby. Right. It could be a serious hobby. But no one's forcing you to spend your time, doing it. So it's like, if it's not occupying a healthy place in your life, step back and reevaluate.
For sure. I think that's a really important point that a lot of people have thought about, but hearing it over and over is definitely helpful.
We all need to be reminded of it.
Totally.
I mean, I do too. And I'm an experienced athlete. I'm an experienced coach, and we can all, we all have moments of weakness, and we can all, kind of fall into, that unhealthy mindset from time to time. But that's why I think it's helpful to have, certainly coaches, but mentors, teammates, training partners who, if they're really looking out for you, can help provide that kind of perspective.
Definitely. So as a coach, how do you communicate with an athlete that you think may be over the line or going too far or putting too much stress on themselves related to running?
I just have a frank conversation with them and approach them and let them know what I've observed or patterns that I've seen starting to emerge, and seeing if they're actually noticing the same things. So sometimes they are, and they don't know how to get themselves. They think it's normal. Yeah. And they don't know how to get themselves out of it, or they think it's normal behavior, but it's just, it's not coming at them in an accusatory way, but it's just trying to understand, sort of where they're at, seeing if they recognize these behaviors that they're showing, and letting that conversation evolve from there. And if we need to make some changes to their training, or maybe we need to, wipe their race schedule clean because they shouldn't be racing for one reason or another, we do that. But that's where the communication piece comes in, because if you're not communicating with your athletes, and vice versa to the athletes, if you're not communicating with your coaches, you're just stuck in a holding pattern. Right? Like nothing's going to really emerge from that, because no one's talking to one another. So again, back to what I was saying earlier in this conversation, like communication, that is the biggest key to any successful relationship.
For sure. Now, what would you say to an athlete that doesn't have a coach, that may be thinking that, hey, I'm too all in right now and I'm struggling?
Talk to someone.
Yeah.
Could be your training partner. Could be a friend, could be a coach that's maybe not your coach, but, you just want to bend their ear a bit and just say, like, hey, this is how I feel right now. And it's, maybe it's not normal for me. Is this normal? Like, for an athlete, and just reaching out to someone. But yeah, that could be any number of people. That could be a coach, that could be a mentor, that could be your spouse, that could be a sibling. But talk to someone. Like a lot of us bottle a lot of these things up inside, and that creates stress, and we just need to let it out and talk it out and get some perspective from someone else. But I don't think that every athlete needs a coach. Some are better off without them because of their personality or just their life situation. But as a coach, I've often said this, my job is to provide perspective. That's what I do.
Yep.
I write workouts. Yeah. I'm there to give you feedback on that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, my number one job is to provide perspective, because, I think that's what, athletes need in a variety of different situations.
For sure. So I work with David Roche, and my experience with him over the last year has basically been, he's like a life coach that specializes in running on the side. And it's very much that dynamic where he's a sounding board. He's, pointing me in the right direction with things. And I think that that's a really healthy relationship to have with a coach. And if you don't have that, there are plenty of other resources that people can seek help from. So to that point, mental health has been something that you've been pretty loud about, which I definitely appreciate. It's great to see men talking about mental health because, previously there's a stigma around like, you should be tough. Don't talk about feelings, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about that. How did that come about? How did that become something that is a priority of yours?
Well, it goes back to me struggling with a lot of these things early on in my post-collegiate career. So my particular issue was with disordered eating. And as I said at the top of this conversation, when I got out of college, I wanted to become a professional runner. And I had this idea. This was all me. This wasn't,
right.
A coach telling me this or, part of a toxic culture of some sort. This was certainly all me saying like, okay, if I want to compete at that level, and I was a Division II collegiate All-American and, had qualified for nationals and track and the mile. Like I was a good runner, but I certainly wasn't anyone who was going to land a contract out of school, but that's where I wanted to be.
Right.
And I thought that, that mentality of if I just work hard enough, if I just push like, a little bit harder and I make this my sole focus, like I can get there. And one of the things I did was look at the athletes that I wanted to be like. And this isn't to blame any of them, but I'd look at their stats like, okay, who are the other 5'8" runners that have a similar build to me? Okay, I look at Dathan Ritzenheim. He's 5'8". He weighs like 118 pounds or 120 pounds, whatever I saw in the little manual that I read or on the website or whatever. And I'm like, I'm 140 pounds. I'm never going to be that fast if he's got like 20 pounds on me. And I got this idea in my head that lighter was a lot better. And it very quickly spiraled downward to the point where, I was still running a lot and, from the outside looking in, training hard, but I was obsessed with the numbers on the scale, not the numbers on the watch. And the scary thing is I was successful. Like I got down to 124 pounds pretty quickly.
Wow.
But it was too fast. Two, I should not be that light. That's not a healthy weight for me. And it was it was an all consuming thing. And so, my performances eventually suffered. So it's like this, and that's what I was doing it for, right? Was to perform at a higher level. Right. So it's like, I got so low that, and I was so weak that I couldn't even perform at the level that I thought that was going to get me at.
Did you get injured at that?
Well, and then I got injured. I had 3 pretty major stress fractures, like 2 in my sacrum and 1 in my pubic symphysis. And I'm in my mid-20s. Like those aren't,
as a male.
Those aren't normal injuries for a healthy male in his mid-20s, but I wasn't a healthy male. And, on the, the non-running side of it, I isolated myself essentially, because, I was so obsessed with this and my social life suffered and like a lot of relationships in my life suffered. So there's that side of it as well. And then when you're an injured runner, who
it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah. Well, who puts your self-worth into like, hey, I'm trying to become, a professional. I've sacrificed all of these things and here I am that's injured. I mean, it really messed with your head.
Yeah. So do you think that experience has made you a better coach?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't wish that experience upon anyone, but I wouldn't have the perspective that I do now had I not gone through it. I wouldn't understand.
Yeah.
And so I can spot those behaviors pretty early on in a lot of my own athletes, but even just other runners that I know, who I'm close with because I went through it. I know exactly where they are. And I've shared my story publicly in, a number of places now. And I get a lot of emails just from, random guys who see a bit of themselves in my story. And I know, and a big reason why I'm vocal about it and why I share it so widely is like, I know it's a much bigger problem than anyone cares to admit or anyone even thinks. And I've seen, this type of behavior at all levels. And I want other men to know that it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to, have a problem.
Right. It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah, it's okay to not be okay. But also, there are resources that you can take advantage of, and you should take advantage of, because if you don't, it gets harder and harder to, undo like the damage, and that can be physical damage, that can be psychological damage. It can be, it can could just be really bad.
Yeah.
So it's like trying to, either intervene when I can to help someone out, or just like by putting my story out there more regularly, people can seek help for themselves as they need it.
For sure. So how do we create this structural change that Mary was talking about, that she's kicked off here?
Well,
that's $1 million question.
Yeah, it's a question that doesn't have a very straightforward answer. I mean, I think we need to do a better job educating both coaches and athletes on health, period. We all had health class as a kid, right. We're in school. I mean, we could certainly all use refresher classes as an adult because it's easy to, forget about those things. And, kind of like we tried to do at the beginning of this conversation, defining what health is. Right. One of the problems with the Oregon project and the culture that they had there is a win at all costs culture. And when you have a win at all costs culture, regardless of what level that you're at, you're not prioritizing health over anything. It's all about winning, right. And it's all about the result. So, I think it's just, it's better coach training. It's like, I think Alberto Salazar said like, oh, my job as a coach was to help them perform, at the highest level. And it's like, I don't know that is your job, right. As a coach, because I think a lot of coaches need to understand like how serious their role is. It's not just writing workouts and, coming up with a plan of like, okay, this is how we're going to get from A to B. Like, yeah, that's certainly part of it, but you're working with people and right. You're working with them, like speaking specifically to running, but this could apply to any sport. Whatever they're involved in, like it plays a big part in their life. Right. They wouldn't have a coach otherwise, right? Like if you weren't serious about your running, like why would you hire a coach, right? So it's like, that's the one thing I know about any athlete that I work with. If they're seeking me out, like they're taking their running seriously. Like right. It's a big part of their life. So, you've got to recognize that and like realizing, like, as I was saying earlier, how that fits into their life and like how everything else in their life is going to, affect that. So it's like, if you're going to do an effective job as a coach, you're not just coaching, the athlete, or you're not just like trying to build this performance machine. Like you're coaching a human being, and you need to take that into account right. when you're
take it seriously.
When you're planning their training, when you're communicating with them, the things that you say, words matter. I mean, look at a lot of the things, not to, I'm just gonna go after them.
For it.
Like
yeah.
if we're gonna put, like, you look at the stuff like Alberto Salazar was saying to his athletes right. directly, or like saying to his other athletes about someone else, it's like words matter. Right. That stuff makes an impact. And it's like understanding that as a coach, whether you're coaching, youth soccer, whether you're coaching, high school basketball, whether you're coaching professional track and field, like you are going to have a profound impact on that athlete's life. Period.
For the rest of their life.
For the rest of
whatever
their life.
You say.
Yeah. And I don't think many coaches recognize that
yeah.
or realize the extent of the influence and the impact that they can have on others. So I think it needs to start with education on, kind of on both sides. And, I think specific to, weight, it's like understanding like, weight does matter.
Yeah.
Like it certainly does. It matters for your overall health. Like,
right.
If you're overweight, like you open yourself up to all kinds of health problems. If you're severely underweight, you also open yourself up to other health problems. But understanding like what does healthy weight, look like? And it's like, you can't just not talk about weight. Like, I don't think that is, a smart approach either, because then you're just not informed about anything, but like understanding what that means. Like what does a healthy weight, mean? And it's just like the key word there is healthy, like that adjective. Like it's got to be about the overall health of the athlete.
Definitely. That was awesome. Who are some of the coaches you look up to?
Number one would be Karen Bowen. She was my coach in college at Stonehill. She's the first, and only coach that I've ever had as an athlete in running who had a profound impact on my life. And
how so?
She cared more about me as a person than she did as an athlete. And that had a big impact on me in my late teens and early 20s. And I'm still in touch with her today. I'm going to see her next weekend at the NCAA Division II cross country championships in Sacramento. She's still coaching at Stonehill. And I mean, I developed as an athlete under her because she knew her stuff, and she brought me along very gradually and intentionally over the course of my collegiate career. But the overall theme there was she cared about me as a person, and to my point earlier, like that had a huge impact
Right.
on me. And that has a huge impact on how I coach my own athletes. Some others, not that I've worked with directly, but I've been fortunate enough to have conversations with. Frank Gagliano's the next one that comes to mind. I had him on my podcast a few months ago. He and I still stay in touch. We talk about every other week or every third week or so. And same thing I learned from him. Like his athletes are his family. And, I really try to, even though I coach most of my athletes, half of them, I should say, remotely, like that's how I think of them. Like, he's more of a father figure to his athletes. I look at mine as, I'm like the older brother. Some of them I'm like the uncle, whatever.
But definitely the fun uncle.
Yeah. I can be, I like to think I can be fun, but I can be a hard ass sometimes too. It just depends on like, what that person needs. But it's like, but thinking of my athletes as family and like having, deep relationships and caring about them as a whole person. So that's another one. I mean, then there are certainly other coaches who I've either met or, have read a lot of their work, like a Terrence Mahan, Joe Vigil, Jack Daniels. I've met all of these people, in person. I've had, personal normal conversations with them, but I've had technical training conversations with them, as well. So, that's, there is definitely that side of it as well. I feel like a lot of the coaching talk we've had here is about, the coaching, the human side of it. And to me, that is most important. But, as far as running goes, there is a technical
There's work
side
to be done. Yeah.
There's a technical side of it as well. And you've got to know what you're doing because especially in a sport like running where you're planning programming that is inherently physical in nature and having you got to understand like, how people develop, like just generally how men are different than women. In terms of their development, understanding on an individual level, how people respond to different types of stress, how they recover from certain types of workouts. Like if you give someone a VO2 max workout, like what that means in terms of recoverability versus, something that's a little more aerobic in nature. That's like, you got to know that stuff, because, you're playing with fire. Otherwise you can get someone hurt and, you don't need to be doing that. So, I'd say those are some of like the biggest ones, like certainly like Karen Bowen and Frank Gagliano, just from like my personal relationships with them and understanding how they approach the craft of coaching. But I'm a nerd. Upstairs in my office, like my bookshelf, which I can show you later, it's like shelves of training, and I've read them all. And it's like, I don't have like my philosophy, but it's like, you can pick things from different people. Right. And I've done that from more coaches that I can probably count.
Cool. Speaking of injury and coming back from injury, a question we had was about the mental and physical aspects of it. What are some ways you work with an athlete or that you might suggest to an athlete who's injured and then recovering from an injury, but worried about re-injury?
So if you've got a runner who can't run, what's the first thing they think of? The fact that they can't run, right? Like I can't run. And that's true. Like you can't run, but let's flip that around. Let's focus on what you can do. Can you swim? Can you bike? Can you aqua run? Can you aqua jog? Like whatever it can be. Can you lift? Like let's focus on what you can do, because then you're going to feel like you're making progress toward getting back to what it is that you want to do. Can you go to rehab? Can you go to physical therapy? Can you get treatment? Yeah. So like, let's focus on what you can do. And I think that's just a good mindset to have in general, but oftentimes that's the first thing I try to flip, because a runner who can't run, they're bound to go crazy. Right. And, they'd rather be running than doing any of the other stuff, but
they can't.
Yeah, they can't. And part of that first step is like acceptance, is just getting the athlete to accept the fact that they're injured and they're going to have to take some time off so that this injury can heal. And they're going to have to do some other things as well to help, the rate of progress along. But, it's focusing on what they can do. And then I think that helps with it helps with the mental and the physical side of it, because you've got this physical outlet where you can burn off energy and emotion, but, also mentally you're engaged and you feel like you're working towards something. And, that's way better than just sitting there lamenting over the fact that, you can't run and you're losing all this fitness and, blah, blah, blah.
For sure. One more technical question, then we'll get into some fun ones. Mm-hmm. How do you coach or work with an athlete in the off season?
So that's a good question. I was having this conversation this morning because here in California, it's easy to not have an off season. You can run outside year round.
Yeah, people are like, what is an off season?
Yeah. Well, and it's a real, like, you'd be like, oh, it's great to, have that option where you can run outside year round. And it's great. Like I can go out any day of the year and I can go for a run, and usually weather's not, an obstacle, but it's a dangerous trap to fall into because every athlete needs a break. You need breaks on a micro level. Like you need to rest during the course of a week. You need down weeks and periods of recovery over the course of a training cycle. And then over the course of like an entire year, like you should have multiple periods like during the year, because you can't be on all the time and you can't be at peak fitness all the time. You
shouldn't be.
No, it's not productive at all. But I don't know where it comes from, but there are a lot of athletes who they're deathly afraid of falling out of shape.
Yeah.
But it's okay to get out of shape, because you have to allow yourself to get out of shape so that you can get in even better shape, down the road. Like you've got to have something to, to work against. So some of it can just be explaining that, to an athlete, the benefits of having a down season. But that's why it's important. This is where I think coaching can be helpful, because you sit down with your athlete and you plan out, your season or your year. And when you're looking at it from the 50th row, you can be like, okay, these are, kind of the big events or the main focuses throughout the year. And we know we want to be peaked and ready for those things, but, we'll build in periods of, this off season or periods of rest and recovery, around that. And sometimes too, before you even get to that point, you have an athlete come to me and they want to run like all these races. Yeah. And you're just like, well, like that's just not a recipe for success. Like either none of those are all that important to you, or you're just like, you just want to run yourself like into the ground. So it's like learning how to prioritize, those things and being deliberate about the races, that you select. And then also just like building in that off season as much as you would build up a training block. For me, with athletes that I work with, and they're, on a person to person basis, like things might change a little bit depending on, who they are and like, what they have to do. Like I've got 7 women who are qualified to be the Olympic trials marathon in February. And I've got like 2 more who are kind of knocking on the door of trying to get in. Like they're super close. So they're going to give it a go at CIM. If they get in at CIM, then, we're like,
turnaround.
Yeah, it's a quick turnaround. And ordinarily, like I wouldn't, I wouldn't say like run 2 high level marathons in that closer period, but it's like, that's what you got to do to get to the trials, and that's your last chance. Like that's what it's going to be. Right. So it's like in between, certainly we'll take a break to recover from that first marathon, but it's like that's going to look different than if we hadn't had another race on the schedule for, 3 months later. So for me, I've got a lot of athletes right now who are coming off of fall marathons and they don't have something else around the corner, or we know what they're going to be doing in the spring and it's a ways off. So it's like, hey, let's use this time of year to like, one, talk to me a bit less. Yeah. You can't be hearing from me all the time either. Like not be looking at final surge every day and what your workout is going to be. Like I think there's a mental release there as much as like the physical release of like dialing your training back, and like telling them, be like, it's okay to get out of shape. Yeah. Like I want you to get like out of shape, and doesn't mean you can't be active. There are other things that you can do, but it's like, looking at the off season as an opportunity more than anything else. Whether you're I don't want to say recreational, but like age group, athlete, competitive amateur, or a professional and elite, when you're in training mode for something for 6, 8, 10, 12, 16 weeks, whatever it happens to be, like you get pretty dialed and things fall by the wayside. So it's looking at the off season as an opportunity to do those things that you wouldn't be able to do while you're training. And that's important. And I think it's just like, it allows you to get hungry again, because if you're like, I don't know, I'm a little worried about people who are super enthusiastic all the time. Yeah. Like it just, I don't know, that just doesn't, it just doesn't fly with me. Like give yourself a chance to kind of like, just not be excited about training for a while, because by doing that, like you're going to get excited again,
more hungry.
You're going to get hungry. Or if you're on all the time, eventually that switch is going to get turned off. So it's like, let's just be deliberate about it and plan it in. And I always tell my athletes, like, it's much better to take planned downtime than to take forced downtime.
Totally.
And it's as much a part of training as the workouts itself.
For sure. I've been at it for a long chunk this year, and as excited as I am to race on Saturday, when I saw 9 off days pop up on my training plan, I was like, huh, that looks kind of fun. So I think that balance, and by day 3 or day 4, I probably won't be enjoying it, but by the end of it, that fire will be burning hotter than ever.
And some of that comes down to, I mean, this is going to sound like a really weird segue. Some of it comes down to identity. And this isn't just professional athletes, but you identify yourself as a runner. If I'm not running, I'm not a runner. It's like, it's okay to not be a runner for a few weeks.
Right.
You're still a runner, but it's okay to not be running for a few weeks. Like that's not the only thing that defines you. Like, go be a good husband, go be a brother, go be a friend, go be the things that you, as we were just talking about, couldn't be.
Right.
To the best of your ability while you were focused on training for this race. So looking at it as an opportunity for me has always been a good way to frame it.
Cool. I'm told to ask about your basketball skills with Billy.
Billy and I were hanging out this morning trying to figure out when we are going to play basketball at some point this weekend. So little background to that, as I mentioned earlier, I played basketball through my junior year of high school. It was my first love. I don't follow the sport super closely anymore, but I still love grabbing the basketball and going out and playing. And about 6 weeks ago, I think, I was in Southern California recording a bunch of podcasts, and I stayed with Billy for a couple nights. And the morning I was about to leave, we went for like a short run, but we went to the basketball court to play, because I knew he liked to play and he had heard that I liked to play. And we had a little one-on-one game going on. And apparently at some point this weekend, we're going to have the rematch.
Nice.
He can't handle me though.
He can't handle you. You're going to crush him?
My first step's too fast for him.
Put him on his butt. So we're here in Northern California, North Face, California. Sorry. Yeah. North Face, California.
We can call it North Face, California.
North Face, California is this weekend. North Face 50 is this weekend. What are your predictions?
Which race?
Let's start with the women's race.
Both are going to be great races. There's strong fields on both sides. I think the women's race, even though it's had quite a few drops in the last couple of weeks, is the deeper of the two. I think up front, call me biased if you want, because I coach her. Io Wang is going to be up there with Claire Gallagher. I think Brittany Peterson. I think we'll see. Who else I'm forgetting in there? Anna Mae Flynn is up there. Like, I think those are kind of the top 4. I think they're going to be battling it out. I'm excited to see how it plays out. I see Io multiple times per week. I run with her a lot. I write all her workouts. I know how ready she is. I know how excited she is for the event. So, as a coach, I'm just excited for her to have this opportunity. As a fan, I'm excited to watch those 4 women and whoever else wants to insert themselves in it. Addie Bracy could certainly be up there as well. Just throw down and have a great race throughout the headlands. On the men's side, not as deep, but I think Jared Hazen and Matt Daniels are going to have quite a throwdown at the front. I'll be curious to see. I'm sure some folks are going to go out with them, or maybe they're going to be the aggressors as well. But I think it's going to be a fast day, on the men's side. But conditions are looking good. Course is in good shape. It's a hard 50 miles in terms of elevation, but it's a very runnable course. The entire 50 miles is runnable. So, I think it benefits those folks who come from that traditional kind of cross-country track background. They know how to race, they know how to compete, they know how to respond to moves, and they can really turn it over when they need to. And there's a number of those athletes on both sides, and I'm really, really interested to see how it plays out.
I think there's going to be a lot of carnage.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. There always is.
Yeah.
It's just like that's almost as certain as like death and taxes here. But it's like
death, taxes, and carnage at North Face.
Yeah, it's going to happen. The races are going to go out hot. I was saying this morning on a preview show that I did with Billy and Corinne, the winner is going to come from that group. Top 3 are going to probably come from that group. But I think there's great opportunity for kind of the 3 through 10 spots or 4 through 10 spots to just sit back early, be patient, and clean up that carnage over the last third of the race.
Cool. Will we see you doing karaoke at the Deuce afterwards?
God, no. You do not want to hear me sing.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on today, and
Thanks for having me.
we'll see you at Chrissy Field.
Sounds good.
That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next week on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you've enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too.